I'm Emma Whitaker, 21 years old, and I always thought growing up in Portland meant I had the perfect supportive family. My grandfather Charles was the one person who truly believed in my academic potential, always promising that someday his generous university donation would guarantee me a spot in the prestigious Marshall Residence Hall. When he passed, I never expected the words that would come out of my mother's mouth. "You don't deserve it, Emma. We're giving the room to Olivia." The betrayal cut deep. But what my parents didn't know was that my internship at the university's financial aid office had prepared me perfectly for this moment. I found documents that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I grew up in a comfortable craftsman-style home in Portland, Oregon, where the misty mornings and lush green landscapes shaped my childhood memories. My grandfather Charles lived just 20 minutes away in a historic Victorian near Reed College, where he had taught economics for over 35 years. He was a remarkable man who had worked his way from a small-town public school to an Ivy League education, saving diligently and investing in education his entire life despite losing my grandmother to cancer when I was very young. From my earliest memories, Grandpa Charles and I shared a special bond. While my parents attended every one of my cousin Olivia's dance recitals and volleyball tournaments, Grandpa would take me to university lectures, campus tours, and academic competitions. "Your mind is your greatest asset, Emma," he would tell me, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. "Olivia may have your parents' attention, but you and I understand what truly matters in life." Olivia was 2 years older than me, with our mother's athletic build and our father's natural charm. She breezed through high school with average grades but exceptional popularity, while I buried myself in books and advanced placement classes. Our parents never missed an opportunity to showcase Olivia's trophies or retell stories of her game-winning volleyball spikes at family gatherings. My academic achievements, perfect SAT scores, science fair victories, scholarship offers, were acknowledged with quick nods before conversation returned to Olivia's latest social triumph. I learned to find validation in Grandpa Charles's proud smile when I showed him my report cards or shared my dreams of studying biomedical engineering. "You're so much like me," he would say, showing me his meticulously kept academic journals and collection of rare first-edition science books that had been collected throughout his decades in academia. When I was 16, during one of our Saturday afternoon chess games in his study overlooking the college campus, Grandpa took my hand and said something I would never forget. "Emma, I've been making substantial donations to Westridge University for years now. When I'm gone, my final donation will guarantee you a place in Marshall Hall, the most prestigious residence on campus. Not because you're my only granddaughter, but because you're the only one who truly appreciates what education represents: freedom, opportunity, and intellectual growth." I didn't fully understand the significance of his words then, but they gave me comfort during the lonely high school years when Olivia's homecoming queen photos dominated our living room while my science Olympiad medals were tucked away in my desk drawer. After graduating as valedictorian from Lincoln High School, I secured admission to Westridge University with a partial academic scholarship. The irony wasn't lost on me that the skills I was developing in my part-time position at the university's financial aid office, scrutinizing donation records, tracking scholarship allocations, understanding university housing policies, would eventually become my greatest weapons in the battle I didn't yet know was coming. Meanwhile, Olivia struggled through her first 2 years at a state college before deciding it wasn't the right fit and transferring to community college part-time. Despite her academic inconsistency, our parents continued to support her emotionally and financially. Every Sunday dinner at our parents' house featured updates on Olivia's latest social connections or internship possibilities, with minimal interest in my perfect GPA or the research position I had secured in the university's biomedical engineering lab. Through it all, my weekly visits to Grandpa Charles remained my emotional anchor. As he entered his early 80s, our roles gradually shifted. I began helping him organize his academic papers, reviewing scholarship applications when he asked for a younger perspective, and driving him to campus events when walking became difficult. During these years, he would occasionally remind me of his promise, showing me where important documents were kept, and explaining the significance of the Marshall Residence Hall. "The Marshall Building houses only 50 students each year," he once told me. It's not just about luxury accommodations, though they are exceptional. It's about the community of scholars, the connections you'll build, the doors that will open, simply by having that address on your resume. And someday, you'll live there. Those quiet moments with Grandpa, learning about university politics and his financial contributions to education, were preparing me for a future confrontation I couldn't have imagined. Grandpa Charles's health began to decline shortly after his 82nd birthday. What started as occasional forgetfulness progressed to concerning respiratory issues, requiring frequent monitoring. As his mobility decreased, I adjusted my class schedule to spend 3 evenings a week at his house, preparing meals for his refrigerator, organizing his medications, and simply keeping him company during my study sessions. Olivia, despite living only 15 minutes from Grandpa's house compared to my 25-minute bus ride from campus, visited perhaps once a month, usually when our parents mentioned they would be stopping by as well. "Don't worry about Olivia," Grandpa would say when I expressed frustration at her absence. "She takes after your mother. Never could sit still in a quiet room with an old professor." He'd wink, but I could see the hurt beneath his humor. On a rainy October afternoon during my sophomore year at Westridge, Grandpa asked me to drive him to his attorney's office. "It's time to update my will and finalize my endowment to the university," he explained as I helped him into my car. "I want to make sure everything is perfectly clear about the Marshall Hall arrangement." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I sat quietly in the corner of the attorney's office as Grandpa spoke with Ms. Winters, his lawyer of 25 years. "I want to be explicit that the final installment of my endowment to Westridge University is specifically designated for the Marshall Residence Hall, with the condition that my granddaughter Emma Whitaker receives guaranteed placement there for her remaining undergraduate years," he stated firmly. "The previous donations have been acknowledged by the university board, and this final gift will complete the naming rights for the Charles Whitaker Study Commons within the residence hall. My daughter Patricia and her husband have received their portion of my estate through earlier gifts, and my granddaughter Olivia has received substantial financial support for her education and various endeavors." Ms. Winters nodded, making notes. "And you're certain about this distribution, Professor Whitaker? No provisions for your granddaughter Olivia regarding the university housing?" Grandpa's voice was unwavering. "Emma is the only one who has shown genuine interest in academic excellence and campus life at Westridge. She spent years listening to my stories about university traditions, the importance of the right learning environment, and has maintained perfect grades while helping care for me. This isn't about favoritism, it's about entrusting this opportunity to the person who will truly value it." On the drive home, Grandpa reached over and patted my hand. "I've also designated you as the executor of my estate," he said. "The house and personal items will have to go through probate with the will, but I've left detailed letters with the university explaining my wishes for the Marshall Hall placement." I tried to protest, uncomfortable discussing his mortality, but he silenced me with a gentle squeeze of my hand. "It's all arranged, dear. Just promise me you'll use that beautiful study nook in Marshall Hall to finally finish that research paper you've been talking about for months." As his condition worsened, I began spending more nights on the futon in his home office, rushing to make my 8 a.m. classes after ensuring his morning nurse had arrived. My academic advisor, understanding my situation, helped me arrange a more flexible schedule, but the exhaustion of balancing full-time studies with caregiving began to take its toll. My parents visited weekly, bringing prepared meals and staying for exactly 1 hour before citing other commitments. During these visits, I noticed my mother scanning the room, her eyes lingering on Grandpa's first edition books and academic awards. Once, I overheard her telling my father, "Dad really should consider moving to assisted living. This house is too much to maintain, and those valuables should be properly stored elsewhere." When I mentioned this to Grandpa, he gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you won't let them change anything. My academic collection stays intact until it passes to you." The winter was particularly harsh that year, and pneumonia sent Grandpa to the hospital 3 days after New Year's. I took emergency leave from classes, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside his bed for 8 nights. Olivia visited twice, spending most of the time in the hallway on her phone. My parents rotated shifts during daytime hours, but insisted I remain overnight, since I didn't have real responsibilities, like they did with their careers, or like Olivia did with her new internship. On January 17th, with snow falling gently outside the hospital window, Grandpa Charles passed away while holding my hand. His last words to me were barely audible. "Remember what's in the blue folder in my desk drawer." In the haze of grief that followed, I handled the funeral arrangements with minimal input from my parents, who seemed preoccupied with getting the house in order almost immediately after Grandpa's passing. At the funeral, I noticed my mother wearing one of Grandpa's university pins, something that made my stomach tighten with unease. Olivia delivered a brief, generic eulogy that could have described any grandfather, never mentioning the thousands of students Grandpa had mentored during his teaching career, or his passionate belief in accessible education. As I stood at the cemetery watching his casket being lowered into the ground, I felt utterly alone in my grief, clutching the blue folder I had retrieved from his desk. Inside was a handwritten letter detailing his donations to Westridge University, the agreements regarding Marshall Hall, and copies of the official endowment documents with my name clearly indicated as the beneficiary of the guaranteed residence placement. "This information is for you alone," he had written. "Trust your instincts, and remember that educational opportunity is the foundation of all other successes." 2 weeks after we laid Grandpa Charles to rest, our family gathered at Ms. Winter's law office for the official reading of the will. The room felt smaller than I remembered, with modern minimalist furniture and law degrees lining the walls. My father sat stiffly in an ergonomic chair, my mother beside him, fidgeting with Grandpa's university pin. Olivia slouched in her seat, occasionally checking her phone despite Ms. Winter's pointed glances. I had dressed carefully that morning in a navy blue blazer with a Westridge University scarf, the same one Grandpa had given me when I received my acceptance letter, drawing strength from this connection to him. As Ms. Winters prepared to begin, my father abruptly cleared his throat. "Before we start, we should discuss how we'll be handling Dad's estate," he announced in the authoritative tone he typically reserved for his engineering firm clients. Ms. Winters paused, pen hovering over the document. "I believe that's why we're here today, Mr. Whitaker. To review your father-in-law's wishes regarding his estate." My father waved his hand dismissively. Yes, but as executor, I'll be managing the distribution of assets, and we've made some decisions as a family." This was the first I'd heard of my father being executor, and confusion bloomed in my chest. Grandpa had explicitly told me he had named me as executor during our visit to this very office. Before I could speak, my mother jumped in. "We feel it's best for the family if we handle things our way, rather than following some outdated instructions Charles might have left. He wasn't always thinking clearly in his final months." The room seemed to tilt slightly as I processed her words. Ms. Winter's expression remained professionally neutral, but I noticed her eyebrows inch upward. "Mrs. Whitaker, I assure you Professor Whitaker was of sound mind when he updated his will last October. Perhaps we should proceed with the reading to clarify his intentions." My mother's smile tightened. "Of course, but Richard will be making the final decisions regardless. We're simply making things right for the entire family." My stomach nodded as Ms. Winters began reading, confirming exactly what Grandpa had told me. I was named executor, not my father. The majority of his estate was to pass to me, with specific mention of his academic collection and the university endowment guaranteeing my placement in Marshall Hall. As Ms. Winters continued reading, my father's face reddened, and my mother's knuckles whitened around her purse strap. When the attorney finished, an uncomfortable silence filled the room until my father spoke. "Well, that's Charles's opinion, but we'll be handling things differently. The endowment will be redirected, and the guaranteed housing will go to Olivia, who's transferring to Westridge next semester." My voice, when I finally found it, came out steadier than I expected. That's not what Grandpa wanted. He was very clear about his wishes, both in the will and to me personally. My mother turned to me with a coldness I'd never seen directed my way before. "Emma, you've always been so selfish. Did it ever occur to you that your grandfather wasn't thinking rationally? That he was manipulated during his vulnerable final years by the person spending the most time with him?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Manipulated? I was caring for him while everyone else was too busy. My father cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. That's enough, Emma. We've decided. The Marshall Hall placement will go to Olivia. She needs the fresh start and the social connections that come with living in such a prestigious residence. You're already established at school with your little research projects and your scholarship. Olivia finally looked up from her phone, the beginning of a smug smile playing at the corner of her mouth. It just makes sense, sis. You've got your nerdy friends and perfect grades. I need the networking opportunities for my business major. The Marshall connection will look amazing on my resume. I turned to Ms. Winters, desperately seeking an ally. This can't be legal. The will is clear. She shifted uncomfortably. While the will expresses Professor Whitaker's intentions, if the family agrees to an alternative distribution and the executor approves, my father interrupted. Which I do. It's settled. The room spun around me as I tried to process what was happening. But Grandpa named me executor, not Dad. My mother stood abruptly, gathering her coat. Richard has power of attorney from before your grandfather's passing. We've already begun the process of transferring the endowment designation. The housing office has been notified about the change. I felt as though I'd been plunged into ice water. You changed his university endowment? That room was meant for me. He specifically created the donation with my name attached. My mother's expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. You don't deserve it, Emma. You've always thought you were better than this family, with your perfect grades and research positions. Olivia needs this more than you do. I turned to my sister, searching for any sign of discomfort with this betrayal, but found only thinly veiled satisfaction. My father stood, signaling the end of the discussion. It's decided. We'll handle the endowment redirection. Olivia will receive the guaranteed placement in Marshall Hall as an investment in her future. You're welcome to continue living in your current dormitory with your scholarship. As we exited the office, Olivia hung back, placing her hand on my shoulder in a gesture of false sympathy. Don't worry, sis. You can visit me in Marshall Hall any time. I hear the study commons that will have Grandpa's name on it has the comfiest chairs on campus. I shrugged her hand away, too stunned to form a coherent response. In the parking lot, I watched my parents and sister climb into their respective vehicles. Olivia's a brand new compact SUV I hadn't seen before, while I stood alone with the devastating realization that the family I thought I knew had been an illusion. The blue folder in my bag suddenly felt heavier, a final message from the only family member who had truly believed in my potential unconditionally. The bus ride back to my cramped shared dormitory passed in a blur of traffic lights and stop requests, tears occasionally blurring my vision as the reality of what had just happened sank deeper into my consciousness. By the time I unlocked my door and stepped inside, the emotional weight had become physical, and I collapsed onto my narrow bed, still wearing my coat. For 3 days, I barely left my room, calling in sick to my campus job for the first time since starting university. My phone filled with increasingly impatient texts from my parents asking when I would stop being dramatic and accept the family's decision. Olivia sent a single message, a photo of her browsing furniture websites with the caption, "Shopping for my Marshall Hall decor." I alternated between periods of numb disbelief and crushing grief, not just for Grandpa, whose wishes were being blatantly disregarded, but for the loss of my family as I had understood them to be. Every memory from childhood suddenly required re-examination through this new lens of betrayal. Had my parents always resented me? Had my academic achievements only widened a gulf of disapproval I hadn't fully recognized? On the 4th day, I forced myself to shower, change clothes, and attempt to regain some semblance of normal functioning. My roommate Zoe returned from her weekend away and listened as I recounted the events at the lawyer's office. That can't possibly be legal, she insisted, outrage coloring her voice. They can't just redirect a university endowment because they feel like it. Her indignation awakened something in me, a sense that perhaps this wasn't just a painful family matter, but an institutional one with potential remedies. I called Ms. Winters' office the following morning, but her receptionist informed me she couldn't discuss the case further as my father had officially retained her on behalf of the estate. This revelation sent me spiraling again, realizing how thoroughly my parents had orchestrated this takeover. When I finally returned to my campus job at the financial aid office the following week, I struggled to focus on scholarship applications and aid distributions. While my own university housing situation was being systematically redirected, my supervisor noticed my distraction during a staff meeting and pulled me aside. "Whatever's going on, Emma, you need to either resolve it or compartmentalize it. Your work is suffering, and we have students depending on accurate financial aid processing." That night, I tried one last attempt at reasoning with my parents, calling their home phone since they had begun ignoring my texts. My mother answered, her voice immediately cooling when she recognized me. "Emma, we've been through this. The decision is final." "But it's not what Grandpa wanted," I insisted, hating the pleading note in my voice. "He specifically updated his will and university endowment to make his wishes clear." My mother's response cut deeper than I could have anticipated. "Your grandfather wasn't in his right mind in those final months. You took advantage of his confusion and isolation to manipulate him into changing his will. We're simply correcting an injustice." The accusation struck like a physical blow. "That's not true. I loved him. I cared for him when no one else would." "You always did have a talent for revisionist history," my mother replied coldly. "Olivia visited regularly and has always maintained proper family relationships, while you've been obsessed with your academic achievements and independence. Marshall Hall belongs with someone who values family connections, not someone who's been pulling away since high school." After hanging up, I sat in my dark dorm room, replaying her words. The stark reversal of reality, casting my caregiving as manipulation and Olivia's occasional appearances as devotion, left me questioning my own memories. The gaslighting was so effective that for a moment, I wondered if I had somehow misunderstood Grandpa's intentions, despite his explicit statements. 2 weeks later, a campus newsletter included a feature about upcoming residence hall assignments, with a quote from none other than my sister, expressing excitement about her upcoming move to Marshall Hall. The casual mention of her being part of a legacy family with deep ties to Westridge University confirmed they had already begun redirecting Grandpa's endowment. That same evening, my father sent a group text announcing that the Charles Whitaker Study Commons in Marshall Hall was proceeding as planned, with a dedication ceremony scheduled for the fall semester. No details were provided about the original housing guarantee, but the implication was clear. Olivia would be enjoying the fruits of Grandpa's generosity. I forwarded the newsletter to Zoe with the caption, "Guess who's taking my place in Marshall Hall?" Her response was immediate. "You need to fight this. Not just for the housing, but because it's wrong." Other friends echoed this sentiment as I gradually shared the situation with my inner circle. My chemistry lab partner, Dina, was particularly adamant. "There are university policies to prevent exactly this kind of thing. You need to talk to someone in administration who isn't connected to your family." Still, I hesitated. Challenging my family's actions would mean a permanent fracturing of relationships that, despite this betrayal, represented my only blood connections in the world. What would holidays look like after such a confrontation? Would I be completely cut off financially if my small scholarship and campus job weren't enough? The emotional toll mounted as weeks passed. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and found myself unable to concentrate on lectures or labs that had previously energized me. My midterm grades reflected this decline, with concerned emails from professors who had known me as an exemplary student. One particularly dark night, sitting on my dorm room floor surrounded by Grandpa's letters, I nearly convinced myself to let it all go, to accept the loss of both the Marshall Hall placement and my family's integrity, rather than prolong the pain with further confrontation. I texted Zoe, "Maybe I should just move on. Is it worth destroying what's left of my family?" Her response arrived minutes later. "The people who could say you don't deserve it to their daughter have already destroyed the family. Now it's about justice for your grandfather, who trusted you to honor his wishes." 3 months after the will reading, a curious thing happened that would completely change my approach to the situation. While organizing my dorm room, I came across an old birthday card from Grandpa Charles that I'd saved from my 19th birthday. Inside, beyond his loving message, he had written, "I've added your name to the official endowment documents at Westridge. A young scholar should always have documentation no one else can control." I stared at the card, a foggy memory surfacing of Grandpa taking me to the university administration building last year, having me sign some paperwork I hadn't fully understood at the time. With trembling hands, I retrieved the blue folder from my desk drawer, carefully reviewing Grandpa's handwritten notes about his donations to the university. He had listed 3 primary contributions: a general scholarship fund of approximately $100,000, a library endowment valued at roughly $250,000, and the Marshall Hall naming rights donation of $500,000. According to his notes, I was listed as a co-signatory on the Marshall Hall endowment agreement, with specific language guaranteeing my placement there. This contradicted everything my parents had implied about their control over his university donations. The next morning, I gathered my courage and walked to the Administrative Services Building, a grand brick structure at the heart of campus where all official university business was conducted. After waiting 45 minutes in a sterile reception area, I was finally called into a small office where Mrs. Hendricks, a stern-looking woman with impeccable silver hair, served as the assistant to the Dean of Housing. After verifying my student ID, I inquired about any endowment agreements I might be associated with. The administrator's response sent a jolt through my body. "Yes, Ms. Whitaker, you're listed as a co-signatory on the Charles Whitaker Endowment for Marshall Hall. However, I'm seeing some unusual activity with this agreement that concerns me. Could you wait while I contact Dean Reynolds? He's been monitoring this situation." 2 hours later, I sat across from Dean Reynolds, a distinguished African-American man in his 60s who had apparently known my grandfather for decades. He reviewed the endowment details with growing concern. "This agreement was set up as a binding contract between Professor Whitaker, yourself, and the university," he explained, turning his computer screen so I could see. "It specifically states that in exchange for the final installment of the endowment, you would receive guaranteed placement in Marshall Hall for your junior and senior years. The study commons would be named after your grandfather, and you would be recognized as the family representative at the dedication." He scrolled down to recent modifications. "However, I'm seeing a change request initiated on February 3rd that attempted to remove your name and replace it with Olivia Whitaker's. The transfer request came with a power of attorney document for Charles Whitaker, signed by your father, Richard Whitaker." My breath caught. February 3rd. That was 17 days after my grandfather died. Dean Reynolds' expression grew serious. "The power of attorney document would have become invalid upon Professor Whitaker's death. Do you have a death certificate with you by chance?" Fortunately, I had brought my entire file of Grandpa's documents, including several copies of the death certificate. Dean Reynolds examined it carefully, then picked up his phone. "I need to escalate this to university legal immediately. A power of attorney has no legal effect after death, and if the endowment agreement is being modified against the wishes of a co-signatory, we have a serious issue." While Dean Reynolds made his calls, I reviewed the endowment agreement included in Grandpa's blue folder. According to the co-signatory designation form he had included, I was named as the authorized representative empowered to ensure the terms were fulfilled. Yet my parents had somehow gained control of these assets as well. With growing confidence, I asked Dean Reynolds if he could check if there were any other university agreements under Charles Whitaker's name. His search revealed an additional memorandum of understanding regarding his academic book collection. It appears Professor Whitaker arranged to donate his academic library to our Special Collections Department, with you designated as the curator of which items would be included. Would this have included his first editions? I asked, thinking of the valuable academic works my mother had claimed were being, quote, properly stored after his death. According to this agreement, yes. All first editions and rare academic texts were specifically mentioned, Dean Reynolds confirmed. By the end of that meeting, the university's legal department had frozen the endowment modification pending investigation, and I had scheduled appointments with both the Special Collections librarian and the university's donor relations office for the following week. At Special Collections, I discovered that someone had indeed initiated paperwork to change the book donation arrangement just 2 weeks before Grandpa's death, paperwork that the head librarian had flagged as suspicious because the signature didn't match their records. They had sent verification documents to Grandpa's home address, which I realized must have been intercepted by my parents during their frequent check-ins during his final weeks. Because the change was never verified, the original agreement naming me as the collection curator remained in effect. The Donor Relations Office revealed similar attempts to redirect the scholarship fund using the power of attorney, which they had processed without questioning the timing relative to Grandpa's death. However, once I provided the death certificate and co-signatory documentation, they immediately recognized the error and began their own investigation. Over the following 2 weeks, I had daily emails with university representatives, compliance officers, and eventually the Director of Legal Affairs for Westridge University. The picture that emerged was both shocking and validating. My parents had systematically attempted to redirect my grandfather's academic legacy, despite his clear wishes and legally binding designations. The most disturbing discovery came when the university's legal director shared copies of the modification forms with me. My father's handwriting was unmistakable on the transfer instructions, but the signature purporting to be mine authorizing the endowment changes was clearly forged. "This isn't just a family disagreement anymore," the legal director explained gently. "Forgery and fraudulent use of a power of attorney after death potentially constitutes serious ethical violations, if not legal ones." Armed with documentation from all 3 university departments, I finally scheduled a consultation with a student advocate recommended by the university's legal department. Ms. Abernathy listened attentively as I explained the entire situation, reviewing the university documents, Grandpa's notes, and the copy of the will I had received from Ms. Winters before my father retained her. "You have a remarkably strong case," she concluded, arranging the documents into organized piles. "Your grandfather took extraordinary measures to ensure his wishes would be carried out, establishing you as co-signatory and authorized representative on his university endowments specifically to avoid complications. The attempts to circumvent these designations using an expired power of attorney constitute serious misconduct." For the first time since Grandpa's death, I felt a sense of solid ground beneath my feet. The university's investigations had validated what I knew to be true. Grandpa had wanted me to benefit from his academic legacy, had taken legal steps to ensure it would happen, and my family had actively worked to undermine his wishes. As devastating as this confirmation of betrayal was, it also provided a clear path forward. Before leaving Ms. Abernathy's office, I asked the question that had been haunting me. How do I confront my family with this information? Her response was measured and strategic. "First, we secure your position through the university's ethics investigations. Then we prepare a comprehensive case regarding the will and probate assets. Only when our position is unassailable do we approach your family, and when we do, it should be from a position of absolute certainty and strength." On the bus ride back to my dormitory, clutching a folder of endowment agreements and co-signatory designations, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. A sense of my grandfather's presence, as if he had anticipated this betrayal and meticulously prepared me to counter it. The detail-oriented student he had encouraged me to become was now the exact person needed to unravel this web of deception. With the university's investigations underway and Ms. Abernathy building our case, I entered a phase of methodical preparation. The analytical researcher in me took over, creating spreadsheets tracking every endowment, every attempted modification, and every contradiction between my parents' claims and the documented reality. Ms. Abernathy advised me to communicate minimally with my family during this time, responding to messages with non-committal phrases and avoiding any mention of the university investigations. "The element of surprise will be crucial," she explained during one of our weekly strategy sessions. "The moment they realize you're building a case, they may attempt to cover their tracks or create alternative narratives." Following her advice, I maintained a facade of reluctant acceptance in my limited interactions with my parents and sister. When my mother texted about donating some of Grandpa's less valuable books to the local library since no one has space for all those dusty old textbooks, I simply replied, "Do whatever you think is best." This apparent surrender seemed to satisfy them, and the frequency of their messages decreased. Olivia stopped communicating entirely, except for an occasional social media post about her exciting transfer to Westridge and how she was so blessed to be continuing the family legacy at the university. Meanwhile, I assembled a comprehensive timeline of events, beginning with Grandpa adding me as co-signatory on his endowments years earlier and ending with the most recent attempted modifications. I gathered phone records showing the hundreds of hours I'd spent at Grandpa's house during his final months, medical records where I was listed as his emergency contact, and receipts from groceries and medications I'd purchased for his care. Ms. Abernathy brought in a university ethics specialist who reviewed the documentation. His assessment was unequivocal. The pattern here shows deliberate misdirection of donations, contrary to the legally established agreements. The fact that attempts to change these designations began in the weeks before death suggests premeditation. By the end of the second month of investigation, the Marshall Hall housing director had not only frozen the residence assignment change, but had confirmed my guaranteed placement for the following academic year. The university's ethics department provided a formal letter stating they had found compelling evidence of unauthorized modification attempts and improper use of an expired power of attorney. The donor relations department followed a similar process, confirming my status as rightful co-signatory and reinstating the original terms of the endowment. Special collections took slightly longer due to their cataloging process, but eventually reached the same conclusion regarding Grandpa's academic library. The university's responses gave Ms. Abernathy the leverage she needed to address the probate issues. Grandpa's house, which had been listed for sale, his personal possessions, which had been distributed among family members, and his financial assets, which remained in dispute. Now we need to document every item we can remember from your grandfather's home, Ms. Abernathy instructed. Photos, descriptions, approximate values, anything that helps establish the inventory of the estate that should have passed to you through the will. I spent a weekend creating a detailed catalog of Grandpa's possessions. From his prized first edition copy of Principles of Economics, to the antique desk, where he had graded thousands of student papers throughout his career. For items I lacked photos of, I found similar examples online to include as visual references. As this documentation phase continued, the university representatives and I developed a rapport, with several expressing personal outrage at what had happened. Dean Reynolds was particularly supportive, occasionally calling just to check on my well-being and providing updates on their investigation. During one such call, he mentioned something that would prove instrumental. Our financial aid department has completed their review of your family's history with the university, and we found something interesting. It appears your parents received significant faculty legacy scholarships when they were students here, despite neither of them being children of faculty members. The only connection was Charles Whitaker, your grandfather, who appears to have arranged special consideration for your mother and, by extension, your father. This information provided crucial context for their betrayal. A week later, Ms. Abernathy's contact in the registrar's office uncovered records showing that Olivia had been rejected from Westridge University twice before, information that directly contradicted my parents' narrative about her transfer. The picture was becoming clearer. My family hadn't just wanted Grandpa's endowment out of spite or favoritism. They had needed it to secure Olivia's admission to a university that had previously deemed her unqualified. This realization brought a strange mix of emotions, a deeper sense of betrayal that they would steal my opportunity to solve their self-created problems, but also a sad understanding of the desperation that might drive such actions. With my housing placement now secured and substantial evidence compiled regarding the probate assets, Ms. Abernathy and I discussed the final approach. We have two options, she explained during a strategy meeting in her office. We can proceed directly to litigation, filing complaints in probate court, and potentially pursuing ethics charges for the fraudulent modifications. Or we can attempt one final resolution meeting with your family, laying out the evidence and offering settlement terms that avoid a public legal battle. The thought of facing my family across a conference table armed with evidence of their betrayal sent a wave of anxiety through me. Yet the alternative, a protracted court battle that would permanently sever any possibility of reconciliation, seemed equally daunting. After careful consideration, I chose the resolution meeting approach. But it needs to happen on my terms, with my evidence fully presented, I insisted. I won't be gaslit or manipulated again. Ms. Abernathy nodded approvingly. We'll invite them to Dean Reynolds' office next week. He'll be present as an institutional authority. I'll attend as your advocate, and we'll have all documentation prepared in presentation format. You should also be ready for significant emotional reactions. Anger, denial, possibly even attempts to reframe you as the villain in this scenario. To prepare for the inevitable emotional turbulence, I scheduled several sessions with a counselor from the university's Student Wellness Center, who specialized in family conflicts. Dr. Park helped me process the complex grief of losing my family's trust, while strengthening my resolve to stand firm in the face of potential manipulation. "Your grandfather trusted you for a reason," she reminded me during our final session before the meeting. "Honor that trust by being as strategic and clear-headed as he knew you could be." The night before the scheduled family meeting, I received an unexpected call from Dean Reynolds. "Emma, our investigation has uncovered something else you should know before tomorrow. We've found evidence that your parents received additional financial assistance from your grandfather over the years. Assistance that was never disclosed to the university's financial aid office as required. There are promissory notes in our records totaling over $120,000, signed by both your parents with missed repayment dates going back nearly 8 years. This final piece of the puzzle explained so much. My parents' determination to control Grandpa's assets wasn't just about Olivia's needs or their desire to rewrite his academic legacy. It was also about burying evidence of their long-term financial dependence on him." As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself looking at an old photo of Grandpa Charles from his retirement ceremony. His eyes held the same determination I now felt coursing through me. "I won't let them take what you wanted me to have," I whispered to his image. "And I won't let them rewrite who you were or what you meant to this university." The strategic preparation was complete. The university had confirmed my rightful position regarding the endowments and housing placement. Ms. Abernathy had compiled irrefutable evidence of the will's validity and the improper distribution of probate assets. All that remained was to present this information to my family and witness the unraveling of their carefully constructed narrative, a confrontation I had been preparing for mentally and emotionally for months. As I fell asleep, I felt a curious sense of calm. Tomorrow wouldn't be about revenge or even reclaiming assets. It would be about honoring Grandpa's wishes and standing firmly in the truth he had entrusted to me. Rather than meeting at the administration building as originally planned, I made a last-minute strategic decision that caught even Ms. Abernathy by surprise. "I want to do this at the Marshall Hall Model Room during the prospective student tour," I explained. "They'll be in an academic setting where appearances matter deeply to them. That's when the truth will have the most impact." Ms. Abernathy raised her eyebrows but nodded slowly. "Psychologically, that's actually quite powerful. They won't expect a confrontation in such a public setting, and they'll be more inclined to maintain composure." I texted my mother that evening. "I've been doing some thinking and would like to meet you at the Marshall Hall tour tomorrow. I think it's time we moved past our disagreements about Grandpa's wishes." Her response came quickly, almost eagerly. "Of course, dear. We've missed you. Olivia is so excited to show you her future residence hall. 2 p.m. tour?" The calculated warmth in her message made my stomach turn, but I replied with matching false enthusiasm. The next step involved coordinating with Dean Reynolds, who agreed to, quote, "coincidentally be present during the tour at precisely 2:30 p.m., when the group would be viewing the model room and study commons that would bear my grandfather's name." The university's ethics officer provided a detailed summary document that Ms. Abernathy helped me simplify into clear, undeniable talking points. By the following afternoon, everything was prepared. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress with my Westridge Honor Society pin, something Grandpa had given me after my first 4.0 semester, prominently displayed. This wasn't just about looking professional. It was about embodying the scholarly values he had instilled in me. I arrived at Marshall Hall at precisely 1:55 p.m., a portfolio of evidence in one hand and my phone pre-scheduled with calendar alerts for each phase of my plan in the other. My mother, father, and Olivia were already waiting in the elegant lobby, my sister practically bouncing with excitement as she pointed out architectural features to my father. My mother greeted me with a performance of maternal affection, embracing me as if the past 4 months of conflict had never happened. "Emma, darling, we're so glad you've come around. Family is everything, after all." The tour group consisted of about 15 prospective students and their families, plus our small contingent. The student guide led us through the residence hall's amenities, the chef's staffed dining room, the 24-hour fitness center, the rooftop garden, all while Olivia whispered audibly about which features she was most excited to enjoy. Throughout the first portion of the tour, I maintained pleasant conversation, asking about my parents' work and Olivia's current classes as if nothing were amiss. My mother, clearly relieved by my apparent surrender, became increasingly animated, detailing her plans for helping Olivia decorate her Marshall Hall room to properly reflect the Whittaker family tradition. I noticed she was wearing Grandpa's university pin, the 40-year service award he had received at his retirement, and forced myself to compliment it as if I didn't recognize its origin. "That's beautiful, Mom. Is it new?" The flicker of discomfort across her face was quickly replaced with practiced nonchalance. "Oh, this old thing. It was your grandfather's, of course. I thought it should be worn rather than sitting in a box somewhere." As my father discussed the exclusivity of Marshall Hall with another parent, I noticed a gleaming watch on his wrist that I didn't recognize, further confirmation of how they had redistributed Grandpa's possessions. At precisely 2:25 p.m., as the tour guide led us into the model residence room that future students would occupy, my phone alarm vibrated silently in my pocket. I excused myself to use the restroom, where I took 3 deep centering breaths before sending the pre-arranged text to Dean Reynolds. "Ready." Returning to the model room as the tour guide was explaining the naming rights for the study commons, I waited until everyone was gathered before speaking. "Before we continue, there's something important about the Charles Whittaker study commons that everyone should understand." My father's posture stiffened immediately. "Emma, this isn't the time or place." I smiled with a calmness that seemed to unnerve him. "Actually, it's exactly the right place. I've spent the past few months working with Dean Reynolds, the Donor Relations Office, and the university's ethics committee to untangle some concerning activities related to my grandfather's endowment." My mother's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my portfolio and removed a single folded document, the ethics investigation summary from the university. "I'm talking about the fact that Grandpa made me co-signatory on his Marshall Hall endowment years ago. Upon his death, the oversight of that agreement legally transferred to me as the surviving signatory, not to the estate, not to Dad as executor, but directly to me as the designated representative." My father's expression hardened. "Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly when he did that. We've corrected an oversight." "Interesting perspective," I replied, unfolding the document. "The university's ethics department has a different view. They've determined that the modification attempt emptying that agreement 17 days after Grandpa's death, using an expired power of attorney, constituted a serious breach of donor intent." Olivia finally looked concerned, alarm registering on her face. "Dad, what is she talking about?" I continued before my father could respond. "Similarly, Special Collections has confirmed I am the sole curator designated for Grandpa's academic library, despite someone attempting to change that designation in his final weeks, with a signature their verification department flagged as inconsistent with their records." My mother stood abruptly, hands shaking slightly as she gripped the strap of her designer purse. "This is ridiculous. You're creating a scene to embarrass us in front of these people." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone, checking the time. "It's 2:30. Dean Reynolds should be joining us momentarily to discuss the university's findings directly with this tour group, since the naming of the study commons impacts all future residents." The blood drained from my father's face. "You've involved the dean's office?" "Emma, this is a family matter." "It became more than a family matter when you forged my signature and misused a power of attorney to redirect a $500,000 university endowment," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. As if on cue, Dean Reynolds entered the model room, his authoritative presence immediately commanding attention. The tour guide, who had been briefed on the situation, stepped aside respectfully. "Good afternoon, everyone," Dean Reynolds began, his deep voice filling the suddenly silent room. "I'm Dr. James Reynolds, Dean of Student Housing at Westridge University. I apologize for interrupting your tour, but there's an important matter regarding the Marshall Hall endowment that affects our prospective students' understanding of our donor recognition process." My father attempted to interject with his authoritative business voice. "Dean Reynolds, there seems to be a misunderstanding. As executor of my father-in-law's estate," Dean Reynolds cut him off firmly. "Mr. Whittaker, our records indicate that Professor Charles Whittaker established a binding endowment agreement with the university, with Emma Whittaker designated as co-signatory with succession rights upon his death. Such agreements supersede probate proceedings and operate according to contract law rather than estate law. The silence in the model room was absolute. Even the prospective students, who had no personal stake in this drama, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment unfolding before them. Dean Reynolds continued his explanation, his voice measured and professional despite the tension. Our investigation has confirmed that the power of attorney document used to modify this endowment on February 3rd was no longer valid, as powers of attorney terminate upon death. Furthermore, the signature purporting to be Emma Whittaker's on the modification authorization has been examined by our document specialists and determined to be inconsistent with her verified signature on file. My mother's hand flew to her throat, fingers clutching Grandpa's university pin. "This is a misunderstanding," she whispered. "Richard was only doing what Charles would have wanted." Dean Reynolds' response was measured but firm. "Mrs. Whittaker, we also have on record several conversations between Professor Whittaker and our donor relations department, specifically confirming his intention for this endowment to guarantee Emma's placement in Marshall Hall. These conversations were documented in our donor management system as per our protocols for significant contributions." The tour guide, sensing the uncomfortable situation, gently suggested that the other families might want to continue to the next stop on the tour. As the group filed out, casting curious glances back at us, Dean Reynolds stayed behind along with Ms. Abernathy, who had quietly entered during his explanation. After answering a few more questions and confirming that my housing placement for the following academic year had already been secured, Dean Reynolds concluded his part. "I trust this information helps clarify the situation. Emma, Ms. Abernathy, please contact me if you need any further assistance from the university." The room remained silent for several seconds after Dean Reynolds exited. My father stared at the door as if it might provide an escape, while my mother had sunk onto the model room's desk chair. Olivia's expression had transformed from alarm to calculation, likely assessing how this affected her transfer prospects. Finally, my father spoke, his voice noticeably less confident. "Emma, surely we can handle this within the family. There's no need for deans and ethics committees and all this public spectacle." I met his gaze directly. "I've already handled the housing placement. The university has reversed the improper modifications, and my position in Marshall Hall is secured. Now we need to discuss Grandpa's house, which is being listed against his wishes, and his personal property, particularly his academic collection, which was never intended for anyone but me." The carefully constructed facade of family unity crumbled visibly before my eyes. My father's authoritative posture slackened. My mother's hands trembled as she removed her designer sunglasses, and Olivia's expression shifted from calculation to something resembling fear. The silence stretched uncomfortably until my mother attempted to salvage the situation. "Emma, regardless of some university technicality, you must understand we were doing what was best for the entire family. Olivia needs a fresh start, and your career has always been so stable with your scholarships and research positions. I had anticipated this exact pivot, the attempt to reframe their actions as family-oriented rather than self-serving." "If that were true," I replied evenly, "why wasn't I consulted? Why the secret modifications, the intercepted verification letters, the forged signatures? Those aren't the actions of people making honest family decisions." My father cleared his throat, falling back on the businesslike tone he used when negotiating contracts. "Perhaps we moved too quickly without proper communication. We can discuss a more equitable distribution moving forward." "That's not what this conversation is about," I said, maintaining eye contact. "This is about honoring Grandpa's explicit wishes, which were for me to receive his academic legacy and the Marshall Hall placement, wishes you actively worked to undermine." I turned to face Olivia directly. "And you've been celebrating your transfer already, haven't you? The social media posts, the dorm decor shopping, the stories about continuing the family legacy, all before the admissions process was even complete." My sister's face flushed. "I have a right to attend Westridge too. Just because you were Grandpa's favorite doesn't mean you get to monopolize everything he built here. Is that what this is about?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective for the first time. "You think I'm trying to monopolize his legacy? You've been investigating us." Your own family, she shot back, dodging the question. I've been investigating what happened to my inheritance and my rightful placement, I corrected her. Every discovery has only confirmed what I already knew. Grandpa wanted me to have these opportunities, took legal steps to ensure it would happen, and all of you conspired to redirect his wishes against his explicit instructions. My father abruptly stood, pacing toward the model room window before turning back. This is getting out of hand. Emma, what exactly do you want? A room in Marshall Hall? Fine, you can have it. Olivia can find other accommodations. The condescension in his tone, as if he were still in control, still the authority deciding what concessions might be granted to me, ignited a spark of indignation I had suppressed for months. What I want is an explanation, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. I want to understand how the people who raised me could look me in the eye at Ms. Winter's office and say, "You don't deserve it," while stealing what was legally mine. My words hung in the air, met with uncomfortable silence. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We needed the Marshall connection for Olivia. She's been rejected twice already. The admission struck me like a physical blow. For what purpose? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. My father's shoulders sagged as he returned to stand beside my mother. We've been trading on the Whitaker name at this university for years. The alumni connections, the faculty legacy. They're how I built my business network. When Olivia couldn't get in on her own merits, He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. You decided to use Grandpa's endowment as leverage, I supplied. My mother stared at the floor, avoiding my eyes as my father continued. Your grandfather knew some of it. He helped us over the years. Paid for your mother's graduate degree. Invested in my startup company when banks wouldn't. We've been dependent on his academic connections our entire adult lives. $120,000, I supplied, recalling the figure Dean Reynolds had mentioned. With signed loan agreements you never fulfilled. My mother's eyes widened. How could you possibly know that? The university's records are very thorough, I replied simply. Those loan documents were in their financial aid archives, the ones you thought no one would check. A heavy silence fell over the room. My father's next words emerged as a reluctant confession. When he updated his will, leaving the Marshall legacy to you, we panicked. We'd been counting on leveraging his name for Olivia's admission and future connections. Without it, she faced rejection from the only university that matters in our social circle. So you decided to take what was legally mine, I concluded. And Olivia, how does she factor into this? My sister finally looked up, a flicker of defiance in her expression. I didn't know about the forged signatures or the power of attorney stuff. They just told me Grandpa had changed his mind before he died, that he wanted me to have the Marshall spot instead. The intricate web of deception was finally becoming clear. And his academic collection? I asked, looking pointedly at the university pin still adorning my mother's blouse. She touched it self-consciously. I always loved your grandfather's academic achievements. They gave our family status. They were also meant to pass to me, I countered. You told me yourself countless times growing up how proud you were that I inherited his academic gene instead of the social butterfly trait that dominated your side of the family. My mother had no response to this, her fingers still lingering on the pin. The room fell silent again, the pristine model residence suddenly feeling claustrophobic as decades of family history were rewritten before our eyes. After several moments I spoke again, my voice softer but no less determined. Here's what's going to happen now. The university matters are already resolved. My housing placement and the endowment terms have been restored. For the house and personal property, we have two options. I laid out the alternatives Ms. Abernathy and I had prepared. Option 1. You provide a full accounting of all items from Grandpa's estate, return the academic collection and any remaining personal effects, and compensate me for any items already sold without my consent as the named beneficiary. My father started to protest, but I held up my hand to continue. Option 2. My advocate files formal complaints in probate court, provides evidence of document forgery to the authorities, and pursues full legal remedies, which would likely involve public proceedings and potential ethics charges for the university violations. The threat of public exposure hung heavily in the air. My parents had built their social standing in Portland over decades. The successful business consultant and his community-minded wife, pillars of the neighborhood association and the Arts Council. Ethics charges would devastate that carefully cultivated image. My mother was the first to break. The academic collection is still intact. We haven't donated or sold anything yet. My father looked at her sharply, but she continued. Richard, it's over. We were wrong. And Emma knows everything. Turning back to me, she asked in a small voice, what about family gatherings, holidays? Will we ever see you again? The question carried the weight of all that had been destroyed through their actions. I had considered this extensively in my counseling sessions with Dr. Park, preparing for this exact moment. That depends on what happens next, I answered honestly. I'm not interested in punishing you or destroying our family completely. But trust has been broken in fundamental ways, and rebuilding it, if that's even possible, would require complete transparency, genuine remorse, and tangible actions to make this right. Olivia pushed back her chair abruptly. This is blackmail. You're threatening us to get what you want. I met her gaze calmly. No, Olivia, I'm offering a path forward that doesn't involve courts and ethics charges for what has already been done. That's not blackmail. It's mercy. The word landed like a stone in still water, ripples of its implications spreading across their faces. My father, the consummate negotiator, recognized the position they were in. We'll need time to arrange for the house. The real estate agent has already taken listing photos. I'm aware, I replied. Ms. Abernathy has prepared a structured settlement agreement that would allow you to remain in the house as tenants while paying fair market rent, which would go to me as the rightful owner. It's far more generous than what a court would likely impose. As the reality of their situation settled in, my parents' expressions transformed from defensive to defeated. My mother removed the university pen with trembling fingers, placing it on the model room desk between us, a small but significant act of surrender. We never meant for things to go this far, she whispered. We thought we could fix Olivia's admission problem and make things right before anyone noticed. By stealing my inheritance? I asked, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. By telling me I didn't deserve what Grandpa explicitly wanted me to have. She had no answer for this, eyes downcast as decades of maternal authority evaporated in the face of undeniable truth. My father, ever practical even in defeat, asked, "What are your terms for the settlement agreement? We should understand exactly what you're proposing." I outlined the arrangement Ms. Abernathy had prepared: return of all academic materials and personal effects, a detailed inventory of items already distributed, monthly rental payments for continued use of the house, and a signed acknowledgement of Grandpa's original intentions and the improper actions taken to circumvent them. As my parents absorbed these terms, Olivia abruptly stood. What about my transfer to Westridge? I've already withdrawn from my other school. The naked self-interest in her statement, without a hint of remorse or acknowledgement of wrongdoing, confirmed what I had long suspected about my sister's character. As she left the room, my father sighed heavily. She's built her entire identity around finally attending Westridge. This will be difficult for her. As difficult as it was for me to learn my family conspired to steal my inheritance, I asked quietly. The question hung in the air without answer. By the time the model room was scheduled for the next tour group, the confrontation had transformed into grudging negotiation. My parents requested 48 hours to consult with their own attorney before signing Ms. Abernathy's agreement. I granted this reasonable request while making it clear that the university's ethics investigations remained ongoing and could only be halted once a settlement was reached. As I prepared to leave, my mother followed me to the door, her composure finally cracking. "Emma, will you ever forgive us?" she asked, tears welling in her eyes. The question caught me off guard, despite my extensive emotional preparation. I considered the woman before me. The mother who had raised me, taught me to read, attended my science fairs, and also the woman who had looked me in the eye and said I didn't deserve my grandfather's legacy. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Forgiveness might be possible someday, but trust will take much longer to rebuild, if ever." As I walked away from Marshall Hall, the weight of the confrontation finally hit me. Though physically and emotionally exhausted, I felt a profound sense of vindication, not just for myself, but for Grandpa Charles, whose careful planning and faith in me had ultimately prevailed against those who sought to override his wishes. The unraveling truth had been painful, revealing a family built on shakier foundations than I had ever imagined. But in that pain came clarity, and, unexpectedly, a sense of liberation from familial obligations based on falsehood rather than love. The 6 months following that fateful confrontation marked a period of profound transformation in my life. The legal resolution proceeded more smoothly than anticipated. My parents signed Ms. Abernathy's settlement agreement after consulting their attorney, who likely advised them it was extraordinarily generous given the circumstances. The academic collection was returned within weeks, each book wrapped in protective coverings and placed in the original shelving order my grandfather had maintained. Holding his prized first edition Principles of Economics, with his careful margin notes, I felt a connection to my grandfather and the academic tradition he had worked so hard to instill in me. The housing transition took longer but progressed steadily. My parents continued living in Grandpa's house as tenants, making monthly payments that I partially directed toward a scholarship fund I had established in his name. Meanwhile, I moved into my rightful place in Marshall Hall, where the study commons now bore his name with a small plaque acknowledging my role as the family representative continuing his legacy. As the dust settled on the legal and institutional aspects, I faced the more challenging task of emotional recovery. The betrayal had shaken my understanding of family to its core, forcing me to re-examine every childhood memory through a new lens. With Dr. Park's guidance, I began the painful work of grieving, not just for Grandpa, but for the family I had thought I had, and the relationships that would never be the same. Healing isn't linear, Dr. Park reminded me during one particularly difficult session. Some days you'll feel anger, others sadness, and occasionally unexpected moments of peace. All of these responses are valid. I established clear boundaries with my family, limiting communication to practical matters regarding the settlement agreement. My mother sent occasional texts attempting to re-establish casual conversation, which I answered politely, but briefly. My father's communications remained strictly business-related, focused on documentation of rental payments and property maintenance. Olivia and I didn't speak at all. Her final words at the confrontation had revealed all I needed to know about her priorities. 3 months after the confrontation, I made good on the promise I had made to Grandpa's photo the night before the showdown. I used a small portion of the rental income to establish the Charles Whitaker Memorial Scholarship for first-generation college students interested in economics, creating a legacy that would extend far beyond our family's internal struggles. Each recipient would have access to Grandpa's academic collection through a special arrangement with the university library, ensuring his knowledge would benefit generations of students who shared his passion for learning, rather than those who merely wanted to leverage his name. One evening, sitting in the Marshall Hall study commons that bore his name, I found myself smiling genuinely for what felt like the first time in a year. The weight hadn't disappeared completely, but it had shifted, becoming something I carried rather than something that crushed me. The study commons had become my favorite place on campus, not because of its exclusivity or prestige, but because I had transformed it into a space that truly honored Grandpa's values. 3 evenings a week, I hosted open tutoring sessions for economics students, creating the inclusive academic community he had always envisioned. Upon returning to my Marshall Hall room after one such session, I made 2 significant decisions. First, I would use my position on the Student Housing Committee to advocate for a more transparent assignment process for all residence halls, reducing the emphasis on legacy connections and increasing access for academically qualified students from all backgrounds. Second, I began organizing a series of first-generation scholar workshops using materials from Grandpa's collection, helping other students without family academic traditions navigate the often intimidating university environment. The work was profoundly healing, transforming my personal pain into something constructive that would benefit others. As for the inheritance itself, I approached it with the same careful stewardship Grandpa had demonstrated throughout his life. I maintained a modest lifestyle despite having access to significant resources, focused on my studies, and used a portion to secure internships and research opportunities that would have been financially impossible otherwise. The academic collection remained accessible to serious students through a reading room arrangement I created with the university library, with selected volumes available for supervised use by anyone pursuing research in related fields, exactly as my grandfather would have wanted. 5 months after the confrontation, I received an unexpected email from my mother asking if I would meet her for coffee alone, without my father or Olivia. After discussing it with Dr. Park, I agreed, choosing a neutral location in a campus cafe rather than anywhere associated with family memories. She arrived looking older somehow, the confident socialite persona diminished. After awkward greetings, she placed a small package on the table between us. "I found these in the attic," she explained, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Letters your grandfather wrote to you over the years, ones he never sent. I thought you should have them." I accepted the package wordlessly, unsure what this gesture meant in our fractured relationship. "I've been seeing a therapist too," she continued, stirring her untouched coffee, "trying to understand how things went so wrong, not just with your inheritance, but with our family dynamics for years before that." This admission surprised me. My mother had always dismissed therapy as unnecessary navel-gazing for people without proper coping skills. "What have you learned?" I asked, genuinely curious, despite my guardedness. She met my eyes directly for the first time. "That I've been jealous of your relationship with my father since you were a child. That I resented how he saw something in you that I couldn't, or wouldn't, see. That I've been compensating for my own academic insecurities by focusing all my attention on Olivia because her needs were more familiar to me." The raw honesty caught me off guard. "That doesn't excuse what you did," I said quietly. "No," she agreed. "Nothing excuses that. But I'm trying to understand it so I don't continue the pattern." We talked for nearly 2 hours that afternoon, not resolving everything, but beginning a different kind of conversation than we'd ever had before. I didn't leave with promises of family dinners or holiday celebrations, but with something perhaps more valuable: a glimpse of the woman behind the mother I thought I knew, and the possibility that genuine change might be possible, even if reconciliation remained distant. My father proved less capable of this kind of introspection. When I finally agreed to meet him 6 weeks later, he focused on practical matters, confirming rental arrangements and asking perfunctory questions about my studies. The emotional dimension of our ruptured relationship remained unaddressed, locked behind the same stoic facade he had maintained throughout my childhood. As for Olivia, our paths crossed only once in that first year, at a university alumni event where academic obligation had brought us both. She avoided direct conversation, but I overheard her explaining her temporary pause in education to former classmates, carefully crafting a narrative that positioned her as a free spirit, making deliberate choices, rather than someone who had failed to secure admission through legitimate means. The final piece of my healing journey came unexpectedly through Grandpa's unsent letters that my mother had discovered. Written over decades, they revealed a man even more thoughtful and forward-thinking than I had realized. In one dated shortly after he had added me as co-signatory on his endowment, he wrote, "My dearest Emma, I'm taking steps today to secure your future in ways I hope you'll never need to know about. I've seen how academic opportunities can be diverted by those who don't truly value them. By making you co-signatory now, I'm trying to protect you from that potential pain. Your mother and her husband have made choices I don't agree with regarding your sister's education, and I worry about what might happen when I'm no longer here. This isn't about love or favoritism. It's about recognizing who will be the best steward of the academic tradition I've built." Reading his words, I felt a profound sense of being seen and understood across the divide of death. He had anticipated the very betrayal that occurred, and had done everything in his power to protect me from it. On the anniversary of his death, I visited his grave alone, bringing a small bouquet of blue hydrangeas, his favorite flowers that he had cultivated in his garden for decades. Sitting beside the headstone, I told him everything that had happened: the betrayal, the confrontation, the resolution, and my ongoing journey toward healing. "You prepared me for this in ways I didn't understand at the time," I said, tracing the engraved letters of his name. "The attention to detail you encouraged, the persistence you modeled, the careful planning you did. It all mattered more than I could have imagined. As I walked away from the cemetery, I reflected on the profound lessons this painful chapter had taught me. I had learned that educational opportunity is not just about credentials, but about personal empowerment and protection. I had discovered that family relationships, like any others, must be based on mutual respect and honesty to endure. Most importantly, I had come to understand that true legacy isn't measured in building names or prestigious addresses, but in values, knowledge, and self-worth that can never be taken away. Today, 2 years after that confrontation in the Marshall Hall model room, I've built a life that honors my grandfather's legacy while creating my own path forward. The settlement continues according to schedule, with my parents making their rental payments consistently, if not enthusiastically. My educational workshops have expanded to include first-generation students from 5 surrounding colleges, creating a network of support that transcends institutional boundaries. And my relationship with my family exists in a careful, limited capacity that acknowledges our history without pretending it didn't happen. The wounds have healed enough to no longer dominate my daily thoughts, though the scars remain as permanent reminders of lessons hard learned. If my experience has taught me anything worth sharing, it's this: know your worth, understand your documentation, and always, always keep copies of important papers. Educational knowledge isn't just for academic advancement. It's a form of self-protection in a world where even those who should love you most might make decisions based on their own interests rather than yours. Standing at the podium on graduation day, looking out at the sea of faces in their caps and gowns, I felt a sense of completion that went far beyond my academic achievements. As the student chosen to deliver the commencement address, I had the opportunity to share some of what I'd learned during my journey at Westridge University. Education, I began, is often framed as the acquisition of knowledge, facts, figures, theories, and practices that prepare us for professional life. But my time at Westridge has taught me that true education is about something much deeper: the discovery of our own capacity for resilience, the courage to stand for what's right even when it's difficult, and the wisdom to build bridges where walls might be easier. From my position on stage, I could see my parents sitting stiffly in the audience, having accepted my invitation with surprised gratitude. They weren't in the front row with the families who had made supportive signs and brought flowers, but their presence itself represented a fragile new beginning. Olivia had declined to attend, having finally secured admission to a different university across the country. Perhaps the healthiest choice for both of us. We often think of academic achievement as an individual pursuit, I continued, but none of us succeeds alone. Sometimes support comes from expected sources: loving parents, dedicated teachers, loyal friends. But sometimes it emerges from unexpected places. The administrator who notices a discrepancy in a document, the counselor who helps us find words for our pain, or the classmate who simply sits with us in silence when words fail. In the faculty section, Dean Reynolds nodded approvingly. Over the past 2 years, he had become a mentor and advocate, helping me navigate not just the aftermath of my family conflict but also the challenges of creating institutional change from within. Thanks to our collaborative efforts, Westridge now had a more transparent endowment system with multiple oversight layers to prevent the kind of manipulation my family had attempted. As we leave Westridge today, we carry with us not just our diplomas but the invisible assets of our education: the ability to question, to investigate, to stand firm when evidence supports us, and to change course when it doesn't. These skills serve us not just in our professional lives but in our personal ones as well. The journey to this moment hadn't been smooth or straightforward. During my junior year, after moving into Marshall Hall, I'd faced subtle backlash from some legacy students who had heard rumors about my family's situation. Rather than hiding from the whispers, I chose to transform them into an opportunity for broader conversation about privilege, merit, and accessibility in higher education. Working with the student government, I organized a symposium called Beyond Legacy: Reimagining University Access, which brought together students from diverse backgrounds to discuss the often unspoken advantages that shape educational opportunities. What began as a potential source of shame became a platform for meaningful institutional reflection and change. Each of us has faced moments during our time here when we questioned whether we belonged. whether we were worthy of our place at this prestigious institution. Let me be clear, you belong. Not because of your family name or connections, not because you fit a certain profile or demographic. You belong because you have demonstrated the qualities that true education requires: curiosity, persistence, and the courage to grow. The Marshall Hall Study Commons had evolved from a point of family contention into the heart of my university impact. Working with the library staff, I had transformed it from an exclusive space used primarily by a select few into a vibrant community center where students from all backgrounds gathered for collaborative learning. The Charles Whitaker Collection, once destined to sit in storage at my parents' house, now formed the cornerstone of a special research initiative focused on economic mobility and educational access, causes my grandfather had championed throughout his career. The greatest test of education isn't the final exam or the comprehensive project. It's what we do when faced with injustice, whether we accept comfortable falsehoods or pursue uncomfortable truths. It's how we respond when our convictions are tested, not in theoretical discussions, but in painful personal realities. After the Marshall Hall confrontation, I had faced a choice: to wield my victory as a weapon or to transform it into something constructive. With guidance from Dr. Park and inspiration from Grandpa's letters, I chose the latter path. Rather than publicly exposing my family's actions, I channeled my energy into creating a peer mentorship program for students navigating complex family dynamics while pursuing higher education. The Resilient Scholars Program provided both emotional support and practical resources for students whose families didn't understand or actively undermined their educational aspirations. What began with 5 participants meeting in my Marshall Hall room had grown to over 60 members with dedicated university funding and professional oversight. Each success story, each student who found the courage to pursue their authentic path despite family pressure, helped heal a piece of my own lingering pain. Education at its best gives us not just the answers to today's questions, but the tools to formulate better questions for tomorrow. It teaches us that knowledge isn't static, but constantly evolving as we incorporate new perspectives and experiences. Above all, it shows us that learning doesn't end at graduation, but continues throughout our lives as we remain open to growth and change. My own growth had included learning to set boundaries without building walls. 6 months after our coffee shop conversation, my mother had joined a parent support group for first-generation college families. An ironic choice given her own privileged background, but a sincere attempt to understand perspectives she had previously dismissed. We now met monthly for lunch, our conversations gradually evolving, from careful small talk to more substantive exchanges about her ongoing therapy insights and my academic research. My father remained more distant, though he had surprised me by making an anonymous donation to the scholarship fund I had established in Grandpa's name. When I discovered the contribution through my work with the University Foundation, I sent him a simple thank you note. His response, a brief message acknowledging that he was trying to understand Charles's vision better, represented more vulnerability than he had shown in the previous 20 years combined. As we prepare to leave this campus, I invite you to consider not just what you've learned here, but what you've contributed. Each of us has shaped this institution in ways both large and small. Our questions in class, our late-night discussions in residence halls, our protests and celebrations, all have left an imprint that will influence the experiences of students who come after us. My own imprint extended beyond the programmatic changes I had initiated. Working with the university archives, I had created a digital exhibition of Grandpa's academic papers, making his research accessible to scholars worldwide. The project included oral histories from his former students and colleagues, preserving not just his intellectual contributions, but the personal impact he had on generations of economists. This work had led to an unexpected opportunity, a prestigious fellowship to pursue graduate studies in educational policy, with a focus on creating more equitable pathways to higher education. The position would allow me to build on everything I had learned, academically and personally, during my undergraduate years. We often speak of giving back as something we'll do later, after we've established our careers and accumulated resources. But the truth is that we begin giving back the moment we decide to use our education not just for personal advancement, but for the benefit of others. The question isn't whether we'll make an impact, but what kind of impact we choose to make. As I concluded my address, I made a final point that came directly from my hard-won personal experience. In my first year here, a wise person told me that education is not about the credentials you earn but about the person you become in the process of earning them. Standing here today, I can affirm the truth of those words. Our diplomas certify our academic achievements, but they cannot capture the courage, resilience, and wisdom we've developed by facing challenges both in and outside the classroom. Looking out at my fellow graduates, I saw not just individual success stories, but a community that had shaped and been shaped by our collective experience. As we move forward from this day, may we carry with us not just what we've learned, but how we've learned to be thoughtful in our judgments, courageous in our convictions, and compassionate in our interactions. These qualities, more than any degree or honor, will determine the true value of our education. The applause that followed felt like a release, not just for my speech, but for the complicated journey that had brought me to this moment. As I returned to my seat among the graduates, I caught my mother's eye in the audience. She was crying, though whether from pride, regret, or some complex blend of emotions, I couldn't say. My father sat beside her, his expression inscrutable as always, but he gave me a single, definitive nod that acknowledged something had shifted between us. After the ceremony, amid the chaos of photographs and congratulations, Dean Reynolds made his way to my side. "Your grandfather would have been extraordinarily proud," he said, handing me a small package wrapped in university colors. "This was in his faculty archive. I thought today was the right time for you to have it." Inside was Grandpa's university medallion, the highest honor Westridge bestowed on its faculty, with a handwritten note in his familiar script. "For Emma, when she finds her voice." The true measure of education is how we use it to lift others. Later that evening, after the formal celebrations had ended, I found myself drawn back to the Marshall Hall Study Commons. The space was quiet, most students having departed for summer break or graduation festivities. Sitting at the large oak table where I had spent countless hours studying, mentoring, and gradually healing, I opened Grandpa's medallion case again and traced the Latin inscription, Veritas in Servitio, truth in service. My phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from friends and former professors, but one text stood out, from Olivia, breaking her 2-year silence. "Heard your speech was good. Maybe you did deserve it after all." The grudging acknowledgement made me smile not because I needed her validation, but because it suggested she, too, might be beginning a journey toward greater self-awareness. I didn't respond immediately, knowing that whatever relationship might eventually develop between us would require careful boundaries and realistic expectations. Instead, I took out my journal, the same one I had started on the night of Grandpa's death, and wrote a final entry about my undergraduate experience. Education gave me knowledge, but adversity gave me wisdom. I came to Westridge seeking academic excellence, and found something more valuable: the courage to stand firm when it would have been easier to yield, the discernment to distinguish truth from convenient fiction, and the compassion to understand that even those who hurt us are acting from their own wounds. Grandpa prepared me not just for academic success, but for life's inevitable conflicts and disappointments. He knew that real education happens not when everything goes according to plan, but when we're forced to navigate the unexpected detours and obstacles that challenge our assumptions about ourselves and others. The room he secured for me at Marshall Hall turned out to be far less important than the inner strength he helped me develop, the confidence to advocate for myself, the persistence to investigate inconsistencies, and the wisdom to use victory not for retribution but for positive change. As I leave this chapter behind, I take with me not bitterness about what my family tried to take, but gratitude for what Grandpa ensured they couldn't, the knowledge that I am capable of standing up for what's right, even when standing alone. That is his true legacy, not the building named after him, or the collection bearing his name, but the values he instilled that will guide me long after the diplomas have yellowed and the honors have faded. The summer following graduation brought unexpected developments in my family situation. My parents, facing the reality that their rental arrangement would continue indefinitely, decided to downsize to a condominium closer to my father's office. This necessitated decisions about Grandpa's remaining possessions that they had been storing, items not explicitly covered in our legal agreement. To my surprise, my mother approached this task with unprecedented thoughtfulness, creating a detailed inventory and asking which items held special meaning for me before making any decisions. This small act of consideration, recognizing my connection to Grandpa's legacy rather than assuming control, suggested a genuine shift in her perspective. The condo transition also prompted my father to finally address his financial relationship with Grandpa, not just the unpaid loans, but the deeper pattern of dependence that had shaped his adult life. During a rare one-on-one dinner, he acknowledged something I had long suspected. "I resented your grandfather's academic success," he admitted after his second glass of wine loosened his usual reserve. "I spent decades trying to prove I could match his achievements in the business world, taking shortcuts and risks that ultimately failed. When you showed the same aptitude he had, I should have been proud. Instead, I felt threatened by another Whitaker, who seemed destined to outshine me." The admission wasn't an apology, but it offered context that helped me understand the dynamics that had led to our conflict. For the first time, I saw my father not as the authoritative patriarch who had tried to steal my inheritance, but as a man who had spent his life competing with a ghost he could never defeat. My graduate studies in educational policy provided the perfect framework for processing these insights. Specializing in the intersection of family dynamics and academic achievement, I began researching how parental academic insecurities often manifest in their children's educational experiences, sometimes through excessive pressure, sometimes through subtle undermining. This research led to my first published paper, Legacy Shadows: How Parental Academic Identity Shapes Educational Opportunity. The article, which carefully anonymized my personal experience while drawing on its insights, was accepted by a prestigious education journal and caught the attention of university administrators nationwide. Invitations to speak at conferences followed, giving me platforms to advocate for more transparent legacy admission policies and stronger protections for first-generation students. As my professional reputation grew, so did the impact of the initiatives I had started as an undergraduate. The Resilient Scholars Program expanded to 3 additional universities, each adapting the model to their specific institutional culture while maintaining the core principle: supporting students whose educational journeys weren't supported by their families. Through this work, I met countless students whose stories echoed aspects of my own, young people navigating complex family dynamics while pursuing their educational dreams. Each conversation reinforced what had become my core belief: that true education is as much about emotional intelligence and ethical courage as it is about academic knowledge. One particularly meaningful moment came when a freshman in the program, after sharing her story of family opposition to her medical school aspirations, asked me how I had found the strength to stand up to my parents. "I didn't start with strength," I told her honestly. "I started with documentation. The evidence gave me confidence, and the confidence eventually became strength." But the real turning point wasn't the confrontation itself. It was realizing that honoring my grandfather's wishes meant not just securing what he left me, but embodying the values he lived by. This perspective, that legacy is about values rather than valuables, became the foundation of my approach to family reconciliation. Rather than expecting perfect understanding or complete amends from my parents, I focused on identifying the values we might still share beneath our painful history. With my mother, this meant acknowledging her genuine efforts to understand her own role in our family dysfunction. When she volunteered to speak at a Resilient Scholars Parent Workshop, sharing her experience of prioritizing social achievement over authentic education, I recognized the courage this required and the growth it represented. With my father, progress came more slowly, and in smaller increments. His contribution to Grandpa's scholarship fund evolved from anonymous guilt payments to engaged philanthropy, as he began attending recipient recognition events and even offering mentorship to business-minded scholarship students. We were building a new relationship, not based on the father-daughter dynamic that had failed us, but on a shared commitment to extending educational opportunities to deserving students. Olivia remained the most distant, though occasional text messages suggested she was finding her own path at her new university. When she finally completed her degree, in education surprisingly enough, She sent me her thesis paper with a brief note. Thought you might find this interesting. Learning from my mistakes. The paper examines social pressure and academic authenticity among transfer students, a topic clearly informed by her own experience. 3 years after graduation, as I completed my master's degree and prepared to begin doctoral studies, I received an unexpected invitation from Dean Reynolds, who was approaching retirement. He asked me to speak at the dedication ceremony for the renovated Marshall Hall, which now included expanded scholarship housing alongside its traditional legacy accommodations, a change directly influenced by the advocacy work that had grown from my personal experience. Standing at the podium in the Marshall Hall courtyard, surrounded by current students, faculty, and alumni, I reflected on how far I had come from that devastating moment when my mother had uttered those cutting words, "You don't deserve it." Education, I began, is not about deserving or entitlement. It's about opportunity and what we create from it. Marshall Hall's new vision exemplifies this understanding, recognizing that excellence comes in many forms and from many backgrounds. In the audience, I spotted my parents sitting beside Dean Reynolds, not as adversaries now, but as cautious allies in the work of educational equity. My mother wore a simple silver pin rather than Grandpa's academic medals, a small symbol of her recognition that some boundaries would remain permanent, even as others became more permeable. The true value of education isn't measured in prestigious addresses or exclusive access, I continued. It's found in the transformative power of knowledge shared rather than hoarded, of opportunity extended rather than restricted. It's about creating spaces where merit and potential matter more than connections or privilege. As I spoke, I felt Grandpa's presence more strongly than I had since those dark days following his death, not as a ghost to be appeased, but as a living legacy expressed through my words and work. Charles Whittaker understood that education at its best is about liberation, freeing ourselves from limitation, ignorance, and fear. He believed that knowledge shared multiplies rather than divides, that lifting others doesn't diminish but enhances our own achievement. Looking out at the diverse faces of scholarship students who would now call Marshall Hall home alongside legacy admissions, I felt a sense of completion that transcended personal vindication. Today, as we rededicate this space, we honor not just a name on a building but the values that name represents: intellectual integrity, educational opportunity, and the courage to stand firmly for what's right, even when it's difficult. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled in the courtyard, Dean Reynolds pulled me aside one last time. "Your grandfather once told me that his greatest achievement wouldn't be his research or his teaching, but what you would accomplish with the foundation he helped build for you," he said. I believe he was right. If you're joining me on this journey, let me know in the comments what academic legacy means to you. Has someone in your life fought to ensure you had educational opportunities? Have you had to stand up for your right to learn and grow? Your stories might help someone else navigating similar challenges. Remember that documentation matters, that institutions can be allies when family fails, and that the most valuable inheritance isn't a building with your name on it, but the courage to stand up for what's right. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.